This video will show you how to fix a wobbly steering column. This applies to pretty much any GM tilt wheel from the late 1970s to the late 1990s. As you can see, my wheel is in pretty bad shape. The first step is to disconnect the battery, then use proper PPE when dealing with the airbag. The airbag is held in place by 4 screws behind the steering wheel. Carefully remove and unplug the airbag. Mark the top dead center on your steering shaft, then remove the nut and ground screw, followed by the horn wiring. Use a harmonic dampener puller to press off the stock wheel. Remove the snap ring. This yellow housing can be cut off if you do not plan on keeping your airbag. Use a steering wheel lock plate remover to compress the locking plate, and then remove this pesky snap ring. Remove the 3 screws that holds the blinker assembly in place. Remove the hazard switch. Go underneath the dash and unplug the wires connected to the blinker assembly. Carefully pull the blinker assembly. You will have just enough slack to do it. Remove the 3 hex-headed screws and then this small switch. Unscrew the ignition tumbler pin. Then wiggle the housing off the column. You will need to remove the gauge cluster bezel. You do this by removing the 2 screws that hold on the bezel and then remove the headlight switch. You can remove the headlight switch by pushing on the button at the bottom of the mechanical switch assembly. Remove the bezel and unplug the cigarette lighter and defroster switches. Press and twist to remove the tilt spring. Typically, you would have to press the pins out with a tilt pin removal tool, but the pins on my steering wheel were so loose that they just fell out. The source of my wobbly steering wheel is from the tilt pins. On some steering columns, the wobbliness is from these 4 bolts being loose. We will tighten these bolts now as we have access to them. I went ahead and used a ball mic to see how oversized my tilt pin holes were. They measured over 400 thousandths of an inch when they should be 3/8 of an inch, just like the tilt pins. The pinholes are so bad on my column that I will be installing a bushing to repair it. I found a steel roll pin at the hardware store that fit the bill. I will ream up the steering column to clean up the egg-shaped hole, then press in this roll pin, and then ream the inside diameter of the pin to match the 3/8 tilt pin. To get access to the pinholes, unbolt the steering column. There are 2 bolts underneath the dash that hold it up. Mask off the area to keep metal shavings from getting inside the column. Start by reaming the hole to a smaller size and checking for trueness. I ended up with a 468 thou hole to clean up the old hole, which was a complete oval. Go ahead and deburr the hole and vacuum out any debris. I used a bolt and nut to press in the roll pin. Use a punch to stake the roll pin so it doesn't spin when we ream it. Start with a smaller pilot hole size and then go up to the final 3/8 diameter. It looks like the hole size is Perfect. Go ahead and raise the steering wheel back up. Next step is to Dremel off the top and bottom of the roll pin. The red lines shown here are where the ignition lever slides. The roll pin needs to be ground down in order to clear the lever. Use a screwdriver to push this small switch all the way forward. Twist the ignition all the way back with a pair of pliers. Install the tilt lever. Pull back on the lever while pushing forward. You will feel an audible clunk when it goes in properly. Temporarily install the tilt pins and then test the ignition function. You should have 3 distinct clicks, one for key on, another for power, and the third one for starting the car. It is imperative that this functions properly before proceeding. Hammer in the tilt pins. While we are here, we will grease up some moving parts. After greasing up the bearing, reinstall the bearing collar and spacer. Install a greased tilt spring by pressing forward and twisting. Remove the tilt lever after testing its function. The high beam switch goes into this plastic housing as shown. Reinstall the column cover while holding on to the high beam switch cover. There is an audible click when it seats in properly. Plug in the VAT system wire clip, and then reinstall the tilt lever. Install the 3 hex-headed screws using Loctite. Reinstall the ignition tumbler pin using Loctite. Key the ignition and ensure that it works properly. It is important that if it doesn't, to go back and fix this. This small buzzer switch plugs in below the ignition tumbler. Assemble the blinker unit with the 3 screws, securing them with a little bit of Loctite. Install the blinker lever and ensure that it functions properly. Screw in the hazard switch. Reinstall the shaft spring, and then plug in the blinker assembly wiring. Reconnect the battery and do a full system check, including blinkers and starting the car. Install the locking plates, and then use the tool to compress it and install the little C-clip. I accidentally left the wave spring on the shaft. You don't need it if you delete your airbag. The yellow plate and yellow wire can be deleted if you are not reusing your airbag. Don't worry if you have some small pieces left over. The plastic isn't necessary and the metal clip is for the ignition buzzer. The locking ring is only for the airbag. Install the gauge cluster bezel, remembering the 2 plugs on the right side, alongside the headlight switch. I'm going to stop right here because my next video is installing an aftermarket steering wheel. Compare the before and after wobble of this column. It is night and day. So now I won't have to worry about my car failing tech inspection at my local autocross. This honestly was the most nerve-wracking repair I've ever done. I was unsure if any of this was even going to work, but it ended up working perfectly. I know that steering columns may seem difficult and there are a lot of steps, but if you go slow and work carefully, anyone can do it. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Instagram.